Attention to details. Good morning and welcome to this week's Jump Recruitment discussion. And this week we're going to talk about cyber attacks, and we've got Tim Stiles, Jump's very own IT guru, to help discuss this further with us. But first, some basic stats. I just Googled these stats and sort of saw what would come up. And this is the stats from 2024, the reports on Q1. 70% of attacks result of data encryption. 5 times is the increase of the ransom bills in the last 12 months. 32% of attacks started with an unpatched vulnerability, and 59% of organizations were hit in the last 12 months of some description. So it's obviously a massive thing that people should be aware of. So, Tim, I'm going to sort of throw this sort of open to you first and foremost to sort of, first of all, what I'd like to get is a bit of your background so people can see the capability and capacity that you have to deliver this type of conversation and your expertise in dealing with this sort of situation in the past. So when we start to ask the questions, we know that it's coming from the right place.
Thank you, Howard. Well, as my grey hair will testify, I've been involved in business for a long while. I'm in recruitment since the mid 1990s, working for a range of well-known recruitment businesses and some of the managed service accounts, always on the IT side, but with a real focus on business. So I've worked my way up through the development side, run IT departments with 90 plus people in them, but equally been involved in startups where the IT capability was me and nobody else, and needing to build from then onwards. But I've also got an MBA to really focus on my business knowledge as well as just IT. So, and I see this subject as a real business challenge. It's an existential challenge to the business when a cyber incident occurs. And I think I've met a lot of business people in recruitment over the years who felt that when or if an incident occurs, they will look at the IT guy and go and fix it. And my take is that's not the right answer. The responsibility of the business is to make sure that when IT have done whatever they're doing to resolve the issue, that there is still a business to come back to. It's that serious, or can be that serious, depending on the type of attack. And we'll talk a lot about that further this morning.
Okay, so I'm going to jump straight in with the first question, and I think this is a question that most people want to ask. So, if an attacker wants to access your system, how do they typically gain access to business systems?
Thank you. Well, by far the most common point of access is through some form of email phishing. That's been extended now to include text messaging as well, and we're all aware in our personal lives of the texts and the emails that come through. Recruitment is a business that, by the very nature of its organization, has to have a relatively open way for people who we've never worked with before to contact us, whether that's clients or candidates. And so our email awareness needs to be very strong. Remote attacks on servers. You talked in your introduction, Howard, about unpatched vulnerabilities. Again, the attackers are looking for those, and they react quicker than most businesses. Most businesses wait for Microsoft to issue their patching, and maybe if you're busy, you get that message on your computer and you think, oh yeah, I'll do that. I don't want to reboot now. I'll wait, and you keep delaying the application of that patch. The bad actors out there, they don't wait. As soon as a vulnerability is released, they are looking to take advantage of it. And then you've got remote access, you've got cloud applications and the cloud instances and the management of those, and unfortunately, third-party workers and people within the organization, insider threats.
So if you start to think about that, if we looked at what you're talking about there, where does the main, as a sub question to what we'll normally ask, where does the main sort of access come? Where do people normally get access into your company? How do they get in?
So the most common is you receive an email. It has a link on it. You click the link. That might be all you need to do to give somebody access to your systems, because where you've clicked to contains malicious software that can then be downloaded. It could be an attachment that people open, a Word document that contains malicious code. So that's the most common way that people will gain access. It's things that they, without thinking, open, click the link, perhaps enter some data into. In my sort of role with Engage and before, we did a lot of phishing simulation tests for our users, sending them emails very commonly saying things like, you need to validate your holiday request, or your mailbox is full. To get more, to extend the size of your mailbox, just enter your username and passwords. And I'm afraid people, they're busy, they've got a lot on, they're going through their emails, they're opening it up, going, oh, yes, I need more. And they've entered their credentials before they've even thought about what they're doing. So testing that and continually training our staff is absolutely key.
And they get better and better, don't they?
They do.
They look more and more like legitimate emails or text messages. I've certainly had them in the last couple of weeks where I've done a double take, and I'm so conscious about this stuff. Well,
you make a great point, and actually, it's interesting when we think about induction. So we talk about bringing people into a business and settling them in and training and coaching them. I'd hazard a guess that nobody, I mean, maybe I'm being slightly out, but almost nobody trains their new staff, let alone their existing people, into these particular issues. Do they have a conversation about what do you do if you get this kind of email, et cetera, et cetera? I suspect it doesn't ever come into the conversation. And therefore, with the churn rate you get in recruitment, all the new people coming in and the older ones leaving, you've got this constant threat because this isn't coached, it's not trained within the business, let alone, as Tim's discussing or will be, how you prevent these things occurring.
Let me throw this open then, Paul, because I think we've all got clients like this to sort of push this along, because I know exactly where you're going to, and I think we're going to cover quite a lot of those things. Okay. So I've got clients that haven't got CRMs. I've got clients that have got stuff that's outsourced. So if all your data is in the clouds, for example, 365, OneDrive, Outlook, on a CRM that's in the cloud, etc., am I still at risk? And if so, how?
So you are at risk, and we talked very briefly with the previous question about misaligned cloud instances. A lot of the people trying to get access to your system are looking for your data. And again, if you've clicked on something and they've got access to your credentials, can they get access to your OneDrive or your SharePoint, which are just filing system servers in another place? They might not be in a cupboard in the office or under somebody's desk, but it's still effectively a storage location. And these attackers are sophisticated. They work from the person who's kind of clicked on something, their credentials, maybe they'll move across to somebody else, and they're looking at what they can get access to. The people who put applications in the cloud, which is, absolutely the right way to go. There's a lot of security that you can apply to your cloud instance, but it's your responsibility. The cloud providers, whether that's Microsoft Azure, Google Cloud, etc., they provide you with a wide range of settings, but it's up to you to choose how you apply that, how far you lock down access. And unfortunately, people tend to, when they initially create a Microsoft 365 account, the first person who sets it up in the business will set it up with global admin credentials, and they'll continue to use that and use their ability to manage that instance without thinking about, okay, those are credentials that allow you to make any changes to any of your data, to delete data, to move it somewhere else.
What you're saying is, what you're saying is, if someone then hacks into that person, they then get access to absolutely everything.
Correct. So best practice, for example, there would be to say there is an account that is needed for global admin. You absolutely need 1, 2 of those at least in your business. But if you've got somebody who needs global admin permissions, they should have one account that is their regular business account that they use for their normal activity. And then when they need to perform global admin tasks, they log in specifically to the global admin account. And one of the very simple security positions you can put in place is to say that the global admin account, for example, can only be accessed from within your network. So it can't be accessed remotely. Again, there's a lot of security that can be applied, and I'll mention this again later, but if any of our watchers today are working for businesses that don't have two-factor or multi-factor authentication on their accounts, please apply that today.
Honestly, I can't reiterate that enough. My Hotmail account, my personal Hotmail account, gets an attempt to take it over at least once every single week. So I get the validation code sent to me that somebody is trying to access and change the password on my Hotmail every single week. And of course, they're not successful because I've got two-factor authentication set up, but every week somebody is trying.
So just out of interest, Tim, can you explain to everybody how simple it is to set up the two-factor authentication or multi-factor authentication? What do they have to do?
So they can go and into their admin, and let's take Microsoft 365. You can turn that on. You can either say that people will need a text message with a code that they then add when they're logging in, as well as their password. You can ask them to use the Microsoft Authenticator account, and Google, etc., have exactly the same functionality. They can get a message that gives them a number that they need to enter. So there's a range of these that they can choose. And again, you can apply relatively simple additional security there that will say, for example, if you're receiving a text message, that the country that you're in when you've entered your username password is the same country that is being used to enter the text code, so stopping people from taking advantage of that. no, we need to try and do everything we can, and we need to regularly, once a quarter, once every 6 months, just review the settings on our accounts and make sure that any new security options are considered and we turn on.
So what you're saying there, Tim, is two-factor, or if I can't even say
two-factor authentication.
Oh,
2FA.
It's been a long morning already. But it shouldn't just apply to your Outlook, your emails, etc. It should apply to every piece of software that you are using and accessing to do your job.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Because a lot of people think, oh, I'm a bit too lazy to do that. I'm going to have all these pop-ups coming up, etc., etc. But what you're saying, actually, to stop any attacks, that is the first port of call that we should be going down.
Yes. It makes it much more difficult for people to gain access to their accounts.
Okay. So obviously, everyone gets a little bit complacent. I will dare say a little bit lazy, a little bit easy with their way of doing things. And a lot of people will turn around and say, I've got managed services who look after my IT. I've got people who look after my, CRM, etc. I'll leave it up to them. So how safe is that?
Well, I think Paul and Heather have probably got a case study that perhaps indicates the impact of leaving it to your third party.
Yeah, absolutely. So, Paul, do you want to talk about your client?
Yeah, absolutely. There was quite a famous case very recently. I think it was an organisation called CTS, and they were very prevalent in the legal profession. Actually, a lot of their clients were lawyers, and they got hacked. And one of my clients had a subscription with CTS, and literally in an instant, their systems went down, and I mean everything. They had access to zero, nothing. I'm talking about their email accounts, their Outlook accounts. I beg your pardon. They couldn't get access to their invoicing. They didn't know which clients had invoices, who owed them money. Clients couldn't pay them. To say it was a nightmare, and I could be here for quite a while explaining the chaos it caused, would be an understatement. And it took several months before their data was returned to them. And so, I mean, they managed to get through it. But if you were to speak to the owner of the business, she said it's probably the closest she's ever been to a nervous breakdown. I think we can only imagine the sheer scale of the panic, that you can't access your CRM, you can't invoice clients, you don't know who's paid you, who's going to pay you, who's not paid you, you can't deal with the timesheets coming in if you've got temps working. Temps can't be issued. You don't even know where your temps are working. I mean, the whole thing was chaos. So, I mean, as I say, it's now passed and they've got the data back, but it was 2 to 3 months. If you want to read about CTS, it's online. I think there is a class action against them. But as I mentioned before we came onto the webinar, somebody whispered to me the other day, I think they've gone into administration or they've been bought out by somebody else. So I don't quite know, nor should I comment on the legal status of the situation. But if you were looking for a case study as in terms of, are you safe if you give over all of your IT activities or your admin to a third party, I think there it is. The answer is categorically no.
Yeah, very quickly.
Go on. I was just going to
add to that. My client had a third party providing their IT support, and they just assumed that the IT provider would just get on with it and do what was necessary. And when they were victims of a ransomware attack, which I'll tell you about in a different part of the session, they discovered that their third party provider had not backed anything up for 3 years.
God.
So they had nothing.
So just so I understand there, Paul, CTS, was CTS a software provider, or so CTS was an external client? So what we're saying is that
no, they weren't. Yeah, they weren't a software provider. Well, I don't know what you'd call it. They were the what
I
do you
think,
call it?
Tim,
The
you know.
cloud storage business, if you like.
Yes, they
Servers.
provided a lot of service to around about 80 companies, as Paul said, many of them legal firms, for document storage and document transfer. So very useful service. But they were then, when they were hit, a lot of conveyancing had to resort to manual processes. A lot of the insurance that CTS's customers thought they could rely on didn't cover third-party businesses. And as Paul said, it really took a long time before everybody could get access to their data. And I don't think we're saying here that you shouldn't be using third parties. It's a very legitimate part of the business, in the same with cloud providers. I think what we're saying is, don't assume. Ask questions at least annually of your key providers of applications and services. And now there isn't anybody really who provides service to a business that doesn't use technology in some shape or form. But ask them questions, ask them about their security and the way that they look after your data and systems, and evaluate the risk.
So what we're saying then is that it might not be just a hack on you that's a problem, but a hack on your suppliers that might be a problem. Does this also then count a hack on clients that might have links into your systems? So if you have clients where you've got online timesheeting systems that sort of roll around to the candidate, to the client, and then back to you, is that also a case that if then those systems aren't safe, then that could also link straight back into some sort of cyber attack in any part of those clients that you are dealing with?
That's very possible. Yes. Obviously, if it's client systems, it might be more limited to particular parts of the business. But if you've connected any of your systems to client systems, then potentially there is some risk there.
Okay. And obviously the biggest risk then from that point of view is access to any back office systems with banking details, etc., which would be, for your candidates, for your clients, and for yourself, which could be quite catastrophic if they can get into your bank account.
Yes.
Okay. Right. So let's push that a little bit further then. So I talked about encrypting data early on. So are all attacks about encrypting my data, or are there other stages of an attack?
So encryption of data is actually starting to decrease as one of the ways of that people are being hit in ransomware. So there are other stages, and if encryption does occur, it can very often be the last one of the stages. We've talked about people gaining access to your system. What are they looking for? They're looking for your data. They're looking to see if they can take that data off your systems. They may not encrypt it. They may encrypt it. They may not even look to delete everything. They want to take that data and they want to analyze it. They want to look at it to see what's there. Because what they're really looking to do is that they're looking to pressurize a business to take action, whether that action is paying them or providing, making a change the way that they do business. And so they're looking at how they can pressure that business. So they might be looking for information about clients, about that banking detail, because you can imagine if you've got the bank details of a lot of candidates and somebody is saying to you, we're going to email those candidates and tell them we've got their bank details, or we're going to sell that data on the dark web. They don't need to have encrypted your data. to have a very, very significant impact on your business.
So what other sort of things are they looking at? You talk about encryption. You say that might now be towards the end of this sort of attacks that are coming. What other types of attacks then are there?
So there's data theft. There is denial of service, which means that they block access to your website and potentially your social media accounts. Again, they're looking for credentials. They are mining that data for information. They may even be looking, for example, at your cyber insurance certificate, so they know how much to ask for, so that your cyber insurer will potentially pay them money. They are looking for information and data that they can use to apply pressure.
So basically, they're attacking anywhere they can where they can apply pressure and work on that pressure from that point of view. So if we then move that a little bit forward there, okay, let's talk about the other side of this. What preparation can a sort of business owner or senior staff take to respond to attacks?
So I think, first of all, I'd say user education and awareness, and Paul mentioned that early on. So this is training your staff when they come into the business, refresher training, phishing test emails to highlight to staff how vigilant that they need to be. As we said right at the beginning, nearly half of the attacks now come through some form of email or text messaging. So education is important there. Something we touched on very briefly earlier, also the leaver process. When people leave your business, and recruitment we know has a high turnover of staff, make sure that accounts are closed as soon as we know that person is leaving the business, or on the day that they're leaving. Now, again, I've seen too many instances of businesses where they have people who've left the business, but their accounts are still active, and we need to make sure that they're closed. From an IT point of view, any systems you have, the backups that you've got going on, where are those backups? Are they being checked regularly to make sure that they're comprehensive? If you've got systems that you manage yourselves, remembering that, for example, the backups that Microsoft or Google offer for 365 and G Suite, they're backups effectively for Microsoft or Google's point of view, and for their convenience, not for yours. So you can, for a very low cost, you can engage a separate backup of your Office 365 data or your Google G Suite data, where you control and manage those backups, and they're held off-site in something called air-gapped, which means they're separate from the main body of your data. You can do that. Two-factor authentication, again, little shout out to that. If you haven't got it turned on, please do so today. Reviewing your accounts, again, talking about the privilege. Everybody should be using the lowest level of privileges that they need to do their job, not no higher than that. And then the final piece is something that Heather and I have done a number of times, which is running a cyber security desktop exercise, where, as senior management of the business, you go through an accelerated example of what happens in a potential cyber attack. It's not an IT exercise. It's absolutely a business exercise in how the business might approach an attack. And the reason why that's so important is when a potential attack is seen in a business, at that stage, there's a whole load of unanswerable questions. And we don't know who the attackers are, how long they've been in the system, what they've gained access to, what data we might have lost, a whole host of questions. And the first thing that IT will do in that situation is they will disconnect all devices and disable all accounts because we don't know the extent of the attack. So as business people, we can go through an exercise and we can work out how would we react in that situation. And the example that Heather and I have worked through is that we just worked through an accelerated attack scenario, working out as business people, how would we react now? What are the questions we have? How could we be prepared for this from a business point of view if our business is under an attack?
And it throws up lots of really interesting things about actions that we can take now to be prepared for if that happens. That if you don't think about it beforehand, you've lost that opportunity.
So what we're saying then is the big word here is about accountability from everybody, but the biggest accountability is about from the owner, the managers, the leaders of the business to actually take accountability to ensure all of these things take place, even though two-factor, multi-factor authentication, etc., can be a bit of a pain sometimes, etc. It's making that a business critical function rather than a potential, oh, I'll do it if I want to do it, etc.
Yeah, it's having the cybersecurity part of your business plan, right?
Yes.
It's putting some focus on it because it's an inevitable part of business life.
Yes, and that's why the two documents, if you like, that get talked about in this. One of them is disaster recovery. That's your IT response to issues, and you can ask your IT provider or your partners about their disaster recovery. The other document that we talk about in this context is business continuity. This is how does your business continue when an incident happens that causes stress on your business? We're talking here about cybersecurity, but it could be other challenges. But that business continuity piece is how would we continue to run our business, continue to maintain confidence from our candidates, our clients, our suppliers, whilst we resolve whatever the incident is.
I think it's important then on that disaster recovery, because I remember a long time ago in the 90s when Manchester got bombed, the company that I was working for had a Manchester office, and obviously everything dropped out of the office. And we said, well, haven't you got a disaster recovery plan for this? And IT said, yes, we have. We've got two different suppliers of systems coming into the business, but both went through the same tunnel.
Right.
And when it blew up, both got blown up. So they had a disaster recovery plan, but didn't think about actually the two separate things coming into the business, but they're actually coming through the same conduit. So, yeah.
And these are all about evaluating risk, because with an unlimited budget, which nobody has, an unlimited time, which nobody has, you could make your systems sort of redundant from every possible scenario. What we're encouraging people to do here, I think, is to take reasonable precautions, but also to look at the potential risks and to evaluate where they perhaps need to invest in training, in system time, in external support to get that risk to a reasonable level. So it's like insurance. You can spend what you like, but actually what you have to do is work out what is the right level of risk that I'm willing to take as a business owner, as a senior manager, for my business and for the type of risk that I think we're exposed to.
So early on, you came out with a comment about bad actors, and that sort of pricked my ears a little bit. And I always sort of think about when I watch programs and TV programs about cyber attacks, and it's always the sort of same thing. I wonder what the back key is. Oh, it'll be this. They get it straight away, and all that sort of behaviour goes on, etc. But who are the attackers? Because it's not just kids, is it? There are other groups out there. So who are the attackers that we should really be thinking about?
And you're right. The sort of the standard picture is a teenage boy with his hood up in his bedroom attacking systems. Whilst they do continue to exist, the real people we have to be aware of here are there's insiders, so people who perhaps have some sort of personal motivation or personal advantage that they're looking for, or revenge that they're looking to take advantage of. There are the standard hackers. There are nation states. We saw a significant uptick in hacker activity or ransomware activity post the invasion of Ukraine, once we saw some of those nation states getting involved. But by far the biggest group, and the group that affects us as business people, tend to be criminals. And again, these people are almost, you could say, professional. They operate out of offices. They know how much a business can afford to pay because they subscribe to Dun & Bradstreet. They have help desks. They offer ransomware as a service where people can, organizations, other criminals can subscribe and have ransomware attacks carried out on their behalf. These are people who are motivated by money, and they have success, which encourages them to continue.
Tim, that was the bit that really shocked me when I first started learning more about this, was that idea that as a criminal who wants to raise money, you could go on the dark web and buy the service of raising money from ransomware attacks. It blew me away. And then I spoke to one of my clients who was the victim of a ransomware attack, who said, yeah, I was directed to the person on the dark web who was going to manage my ransomware attack. And I was told that if they didn't communicate with me well, they had a line manager that I could escalate to if I wasn't happy with the way in which they're. And you kind of go, what?
It's astonishing.
This stuff is so well organized by the bad actors. I find that really quite frightening.
It was interesting. There's a documentary, I think that it came, not a documentary, there's a drama series came out, I think it was about 2019, 2020, called Cold Call.
Yeah.
And when I watched that, it was quite sort of sobering how easy it is, but how complex the criminals are and how in depth they go into this person's in this state of mind now. Right, we need to move them to this state of mind, we need to move to this state of mind. And they're doing all of these things behind the scenes just to extract money. And obviously, when you start to think about what they're doing from a business point of view, it's horrific. So
it's very sophisticated. Very sophisticated.
And they are always looking at what's working to do more of it, just as we do as business people ourselves.
Yep.
If things aren't working particularly well, then they'll do less of it or stop doing it.
Yep.
And they are always looking at ways to improve the likelihood of success. We talk about the number of calls that we make to find a new client. They look at how many emails have they got to send, how many text messages.
How do they pitch the request for money at a level where people will pay it rather than ride it out? It's very clever, very sophisticated.
So rather than KPIs, they have CPIs then. criminal performance indicators. Just put a bit of light on the subject. Okay, so last question then. I think this is the question again that I know I'm pretty certain Paul was asked this question when he went through his situation. When an attack happens, what should I do? And the question is, should I pay the ransom?
It's a great question.
A very good question. So first of all, don't panic. That doesn't help. It doesn't help anybody. I think the business leaders, and again, this is what we draw out in a tabletop exercise, is thinking about the different stakeholders who will be involved in this, whether that's your own staff, clients, candidates, investors. You think about government agencies, whether that's the Information Commissioner's Office, who may need to be informed, the police, your insurers, if as many businesses have nowadays, there's cyber insurance involved. I think it's very important for businesses to not fall into the trap to thinking that they control the narrative. And again, it's one of the things we tease out in the tabletop exercise is businesses think, okay, I've been approached by a bad actor who says that they've gained access to my system. I'm going to now negotiate with them or involved in them, and I'm not going to communicate with my stakeholders at the moment until I know what's going on. Going back to what we were talking about just a few minutes ago, the bad actors want to increase the pressure on you. They want to communicate with your clients, with your candidates, potentially if they have access to that data. So you almost certainly do not control the narrative. They will know what you, where your pressure points are likely to be. So communication is absolutely key during the crisis. With regards to do you pay or don't pay, we have to say that actually the decision of whether you pay or not may not be your own. Your insurance company may take that decision away from you. If you pay, you could be subject to sanctions because the hackers or the people behind the attack could be from a nation state or be operating out of a nation state where you would be sanctions breaking if you were actually paying money to an organization. Do you have a Bitcoin account? Do you know how to even pay these people? And again, I think for me, one of the most sobering statistics is that of the organizations who pay, 80% of them are attacked again within a year.
Really? Wow.
Because, of course, again, you're known then as somebody who will pay. So why wouldn't they share your detail with other organizations who have different types of attacks because you've been shown to be a good prospect?
It's really interesting when you start thinking about the amount of data that we hold. And obviously, the bigger the organization, the bigger the data, the more you do temp, the bigger the data. You sent me some stats early on, which I didn't want to sort of throw out right at the beginning. One of the stats that really hit me was that 61% is the average amount of data recovered, and only 4% of businesses that get a ransomware attack recover all of their data.
Wow.
My client recovered none of their data. They lost 3 years of trading data.
What a disaster.
Yeah. And the other statistic I think that's very interesting on that is that 25 days is the average business interruption, and during that 25 days, and I think obviously there's some of these last for much longer. Almost all of your business resources are put into trying to recover from this. So all the plans, all the targets that you have, everything that you've got, everything is put on hold whilst you're trying to recover from this instance. And I think if business owners think about that, think about what would happen if for the next sort of 3.5 weeks, everybody in their business was doing nothing other than trying to recover from an incident.
Yeah.
And a bit of preparation, a bit of thinking about this, a bit of considering where the risks are likely to be is a pretty good investment in time.
I think you're right, Tim. I think there's the thing you've kind of hinted at there as well, which is the impact on an individual's mental health. I mean, I'm sure most of us would not sleep, frankly, whilst this was cracking on. I mean, the fear that must consume people under these circumstances must be unimaginable. So, it's hard enough at the moment, as we're all aware, running a business in the current economic climate. The last thing you need in addition to that are these kind of traumas. And I think the impact is unimaginable. So I can speak, as I said earlier, from direct contact with one of my longest serving clients who I've worked with for 10, 12 years. And I know what she went through during this period. So it's I think, as you've said very clearly, prevention is better than whatever the expression is. So, let's make sure that we get ahead of it rather than deal with it after it's occurred.
It's the Cure, Paul.
That's the word. Well, they were a band, weren't they? The Cure, I think. I'm just trying to remember.
They were a band in the 80s. Yeah. Great band.
Good band, actually.
Great band.
But we'll carry on. So what we're saying then is that we've got to be really vigilant of what we're doing, and we've got to take more responsibility and not just look at this as if it's it's a movie thing. It only happens occasionally. It's happening, as the stats are right at the beginning. 56% of companies had some form of attack in the year, and whether that's been blocked or not, etc., is a whole different conversation. But what we're saying is that things like two-factor, multiple-factor authentication is priority to get embedded. Look at your areas of weakness, and I think for all recruiters, one of the biggest areas of weakness is our own staff. And one of our own staff can be also one of our biggest strengths in there. But obviously, when staff are leaving, how many staff take data, take information, etc., which is all about data breach and things like that can be prevented and stopped right at the beginning. And so, I was going to say, so it's about the accountability of the owners of the business and the managers of the business to ensure that everything is in place. It's not just down to IT.
And I think, as you said, and it's an important point, and where are we? The 26th of June, in a year's time, 2 years' time, how much more sophisticated are these criminals going to become? I mean, it's not a question of getting on sort of the edge of the curve. You've really got to be on this consistently, and Tim was making that point. I mean, please catch up. Do everything that Tim has suggested if you've been listening carefully, but also don't think that once you've dealt with it, that's done and dusted, because as Tim was expressing, they're very sophisticated, and what works today may not work in 6 months or 12 months or 2 years' time. This is the world we live in, unfortunately, and we need to be very aware of the potential threats to our business, our mental health, and to our staff. So I think these are great points.
Yeah, the criminals are as excited by the potential of AI as we are.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So they will be also ringing the bell in their office every time they've made a deal.
Yep.
Is the way to look at it.
There's a sobering thought, isn't there?
There's a sobering thought. So, Tim, for such what I would always class as a dry and fragile subject, you've brought many parts of it alight and really highlighted areas that everyone should be looking at. So thank you very much for that. Next week, ladies and gentlemen, we start a whole new series. It's the last series before we close up for the summer. So we'll have 4 red hot topics for us. Tim, Paul, Heather, once again, thanks for your input. Ladies and gentlemen, thanks for your input. If you liked what we put something on LinkedIn, because I think this one needs a bit more shouting out about most things. I'll be posting this on LinkedIn as well, Tim. But thanks so much for your input, and we'll see you all next week. Thank you very much.
Thank you, everybody. Take care.
Bye.